stars without 133. How to dance with art. Franz Anton Palmer, the subject of the different regime of museum, theater, exhibition and performance is one that is important to your project at Musée de la Danse. Is very complex piece, and I know there has been a development in realizing this project and setting up the form that it has today. The first time you told me about this idea, rather vaguely, was pretty much at the same time as when you started your work at this place. I believe it was in 2010. In the piece of this, there are some elements that create an obvious connection between imposing or creating objects and inscribing them in time. Was this the first museum project you conceived of, or is Charmtas? The first project that was really connected to Musée de la Danse was the archive book on the heritage of Mercer Cunningham, 50 Years of Dance, for which I created a flip book. But it's true that it was the first piece produced by Musée de la Danse. At first, the museum itself was really just an idea. I wasn't sure whether we should believe in the idea that we could find a collective form that would be moving and completely immobile at the same time, and whether we could find a way to present the whole choreography with all of its movement and presented in just 2 seconds. We just started with these ideas, and we did a lot of workshops with students and amateurs to do research on how such a form could function. It was just a bit of right after this time that we started rehearsals on. It's a failure of sorts. We originally thought that it would be really meditative and 6 hours long. We didn't want it to be very physically exhausting. It will consist only of shifting movement between bodies. We also thought we could never tour with it as it was too long. The more we worked, the more we chose materials that weren't extreme, but the extreme to be performed in an ongoing way. Thus the piece has transformed quite a bit from how it was meant to be. Franz Anton Kramer. But as we all know, failure is always better than success. There have been different contexts for this piece already during its development. I know that you performed it outside and also in a museum. Now it is a theater. The main aspects of this afternoon are the different traditions or merchandising that institutional space can add to perception of reception of a piece. Was there a significance to all these different contexts? Of course, we wanted the piece last 6 hours so that it could be put in a museum and fit its normal opening hours. Then we changed our mind and thought it would be more interesting to have these movements that are a bit shaky. But we couldn't do those for 6 hours straight, so we accept the fact that the piece would be shorter than planned. In the end, I was somehow a bit disappointed because it ended up being just a theater piece, even though the premiere was a manifesta. We thought it would be impossible to set it up a normal theater, so the premiere was a grass field by a road with a lot of traffic near a drug and prostitute area in Jena. It actually didn't start as a theater piece. It was only for the performance at MoMA last fall that we could rethink this. How could we adapt the concrete format of the auditorium at MoMA? How to to adapt it to the opening times of museum. We tried the different versions and then decide to reduce the physicality of the piece a bit so that we could perform it twice a day and we could do demonstrations of the
Dobrý den, občerstvení.
Of one specific dancer going through the 25 movements between these two performances. As such, it became an endless form with no break. It felt as if we had come back to the original idea of the piece. It was for sure exhausting, but we liked the fact that we had found another kind of physicality for it. It's a way to perform it endlessly, further changing the piece. Friends, there is debate right now of considering dance not so much as the praising of several movements, but as movement as an object, as a thing instead. You could detect an idea in this piece that movement is fragment in order to become an object, which on the other hand would make it more accessible for a museum context. On the other hand, there is exchange of or interference between exhibition and performance. The formal has a free time regime and supposedly less movement, while the latter always fulfill itself in its own time. In the case of this work, is there really a difference between the performance and the exhibition? Of course, the first thing you need to know is that we decide to name each of the 25 movements. Let's say the one we call the washing is the first movement. Another one we call helicopter, where the shoulders are doing a circle, the head another circle, and 2 feet 2 additional circles. But in fact, it was somehow a long solo with constantly changing movements. In this long ongoing movement, we decide this what we call the frizz, and this is what we call second. And sometimes inside the first movement you already have the second movement. There is complexity there. It's not just first, second, third movement. There are somehow hidden within each other. You never know when the second starts and the first ends. There is of course the big question of framing, rules, cause and history between the theatre and museum, but my thinking about this piece is connected to this idea of the neutral. He writes that the idea of a conflict is not about choosing between peace or war. Conflicts that you wouldn't want to put yourself into. It's not about ending or starting the conflict, but about finding suspension. My idea with this piece was similar. I thought there would be no beginning and no end, that the movement would be continuously changing. Things would change, but also not. That is how it is connected to the neutral. It is in the middle between the museum and theater. It isn't only let's do an exhibition or let's do a theater piece. It's a form between the two that doesn't aim to fit opening hours of a museum or to fit the stage. It isn't only about the format, but really about the form. Perhaps dance works between theater and exhibition according to the debate, but it also works between mobility and immobility, between stillness and movement. I love dance when it works through inert body. Take for example in funk with this inert bodies, there is choreography, there is dance, even though they don't move. I like the idea that although we move a lot in the piece, there is something inside that isn't moving, that is completely fixed. The shift not only between the theater and the museum, but between mobility and immobility is a core question for dancers. Do you only want to move in a piece, or do you want to rest before or after moving, or during your moves? The question that are posed through dancing or through visual art are not only connected to institution or the frame that we are trying to rebuild. I hope that institutional frames are also trying to follow the artist's wishes or the artist's desire to try things. Friends, it's characteristic for your work to always go beyond institutional frameworks, but to turn the question around. Why open up this opposition between performance and exhibition, since exhibition in itself is based very much on movement? Transforming a choreographic center and a production place into a dance museum makes sense to many people. But would it make sense to think of museum without thinking in terms of performance or movement, or let's say change? Boris, Musée de la Danse, it didn't come from a desire to connect museum and dance. It came from the idea that the usual institutional space for dance are dance schools and theaters. These two spaces don't have much in common. In a dance class or workshop, you practice dance. When you go to theater like tonight, then you watch dance. Dance is either something to be practiced or performed while you're sweating in your studio, or something that you see on a stage in theater. I thought we needed a third space. My aim was to find a place that would be between theory and practice. These first two spaces have difficulties with theory. The amount of theory that can be incorporated into a dance school is limited. And how much theory can a theater stage take? So I thought Musée de la Danse is one potential third space where you could experience dance on a wider scale, from written dance to reading dance, from the dance video or film to the dance hall, from the archive to the exhibition. And there's a wider way to conceive the experience of dance. Musée de la Danse connects the museum with dance. Of course, it's a part of this debate about the frame of theater, exhibitions and museums, but at the same time is a third door to escape, or to include the theater and dance school while not being trapped into those spaces. Friends, I think it's also in your endeavor to go beyond institutional question. You said in the interview that in the beginning, people told you that there was no way of conceiving a place where dance and museum could ever go together. You see in many instances that interests are mutual. Treating the history of dance is specific interest that you research not only in the Museum of Dance, but in several other projects. As far as I can see, there is also an idea of bringing together the past of dance, the information that is in dance, with a contemporary way of working or creating. Boris, yes, dance has a very specific connection to its own history. For example, many choreographers wrote books, but you don't read them in dance school, although I'm sure there are some exceptions. Sometimes we are cut from our own history. When I started out, I chose contemporary dance, but then it became clear that the history existed for the ballet, for the opera. There are many ways to connect to history, and if you choose contemporary dance, it's not like you're suddenly completely disconnected from what has been done before. It was really a problem in France in the 80s. when I started out, because I felt that each new choreographer had to prove that he or she is creating a new movement or a new style as his or her signature to recognize, to make sure it wasn't a movement from the past. It was kind of schizophrenic and also puristic idea of inventing movement, but I thought it was really like reinventing the fields. I practiced improvisation with famous dancers like Ustí, and others when I was really young. I tried to improvise with these fantastic people around and trying to do something new, and each time I would notice that I kept doing the same movement. I was trying to escape this thought of why I'm always doing this. Though improvisation, you discover that you are not trapped in your own history, but that you have your own pattern, your own education. You have gestures that you want to escape, but they come back. It is doing archaeology on on yourself through improvisation. History and memory are interconnected in improvisation, even more than in the written kind of dance works. When I tried to write calligraphy, I spent time to thinking about what the first movement is, and I tried to make it unique. But in the case of improvisation, I had no time to think. I realized that I have heavy luggage with me that I just can't get rid of. The dance starts and tries to address presuppositions of museum and dance, but also of history, improvisation, research, and heritage. It tries to rearrange the collection between past, present, and future. It tries to create a mix. Friends, a perception of our museum is exactly that: different layers of history, different styles and ways of working coexist, and you can pass through. Take a look at them and then take what you need or what seems important for you to you. Maybe there is a link here to last weekend's project, 20 dances for the 20th century, which in a way is an enactment of this possibility to be in contact with all kinds of historic style and to make them their own. First, why not? This is the key phrase that we discovered through starting with the dance. We worked with many architects, philosophers, visual artists, curators, archivists, and historians, and we kept thinking about what the Musée de la Danse means for them and for us. There was a movement when we thought, why don't we have many dance museums? Because we could have them because of impermanence. And then we asked ourselves, where is history in dance? It is in my own body and in your own body. We have films, notebooks, scores, and texts, and of course we all are very important. We shouldn't erase this. But for choreography, the main tool is me knowing the movement, having them in my body, and being able to transmit them, just like Trisha Brown's dancers know Trisha Brown's choreographers can transmit them to other dancers. It was clear that the body is the main storage place in dance, whereas a painting would kept in a shape. And our body, our own storage place, is a moving place. It's a place where it's not completely sure if the movement as such is really mine or yours. This became a productive idea because then we could, for example, for 20 dancers, invite dancers to work with their bodies as their specific archaeology or museum friends. And this probably troubles in notion of work as a gesture of genius or research that has been done. once an dance space as it is. Adding dance to this context means that artwork changes because of other bodies performing it, or because of bodies aging, and so on. Of course, the effect was obviously at MoMA and some other museums. They are full of working people. You have the guides and guard, the people who moved artwork, curators, all sorts of people work in the museum. But normally, when you hang a painting on the wall, you try not to see too many of workers because they would disrupt your vision of the artwork. They would cause interference. Now you have the dancers who are really working and actually doing something that constitutes an artwork. Friends, there is a part in the foundational manifesto of music or dance that I like. It says that dancing museum can be attached to each other, actually other places, in order to subvert, like a parasite. You basically go and add your own position, your own opinion and experience in order to change the place where you go. There is another major project at the end of this festival, Expo Zero, the real dancing museum, if I may say so. The title is, of course, a bit ambiguous. Expo Zero could mean there is no exhibition, zero exhibition. At the same time, there is the point zero. Let's start from zero and see what is possible. There's 6th edition of Expo Zero, but there's no numbering in the case of this piece. There's no Expo Zero in then 1, 2, 3, and etc. It seems to me as though it was always the same project. Yet there are always different people participating, and the space are different. Or is this the same project, or is it none? Not. First, I think you could ask this question about almost all of the project we did. When we did 20 dances for 20th century at MoMA, it was suddenly a collection of live art in ephemeral and fragile in the famous art collection of MoMA. The two museums being confronted with another. If you do 20 dances for 20th century, the Soviet memorial in Tower Park, it suddenly takes on completely other significance. You could perform the exact same piece, but in the memorial, it addresses memory, ghost, and death. It is, of course, also another project there, because what makes sense in MoMA does not make sense at memorial. We also have some artworks in our collection, some exhibition protocol, for example. There are different if they are put somewhere new, even though they're still the same protocol. In the case of Expo Zero, the protocol stated what we had moved from building, chairs, tables, computers, beamers, speakers, even the garbage cans. In one edition of Expo Zero, we worked with the Indian dancer Padmini Shatter. She immediately said she hated the idea of music dance because dance in India had died from being musified. After their independence, little boxes were made for all the Indian dancers, and they died. That was her feeling. This box is that box is that the Indian dance collapsed in front of her eyes. For her, music and dance are two things you should never do together, and this is something that we could express with Expo Zero, to tell people what you love in a museum and what you hate about it. We then worked together for 5 days and there was no artwork to be presented. We instead opened up the space to turn our discussion into performative idea. We have 10 guides through the empty spaces, which translate to 10 regions of the hub. Through these guides, we could then lecture, demonstrate, describe, share with the audience. You could do whatever you wanted. You didn't have tools to build your artwork. You had to discuss, imagine, or perform it yourself. And then you have Expo Zero in Berlin, of course. And even if some of the people have been invited, it is still a format with empty spaces and then 10 guys spending some time thinking about what Musée de la Danse could be. They share their ideas with the audience. I would say that Expo Zero succeed when the visitors have the feeling they have visited Musée de la Danse or were visited by a museum. Maybe you only followed or spent 2 hours with Jena Jang. Perhaps you gave a movement to tune its shells, and after living and having spent some time with these artists, you will have an idea. You won't have seen a real performance by Trisha Brown Company, but you will go out with an idea about Trisha Brown, maybe with an idea about for a future project of Musée de la Danse, or an idea about how you could be a performer in Musée de la Danse. Perhaps some other kind of idea. The important thing being that you leave with a feeling of having visited or having been visited by the Museum of Dance. This is how Expo Zero works. When we did first Expo Zero, we thought we could continue with Expo 1, Expo 2, and move on. And we did move on with new format like 20 dances for 20th century, retrospective, and many other projects. Yet Expo Zero is nevertheless a good format to find a very simple way to connect an architect, philosopher, and critique, a historian, and dancer, and to share a kind of exhibition performance space in a very visible way. Each participant has their own tool. Some speak, some dance, some move, some exchange with their visitors. It's not a big media problem because the architect doesn't have a computer to design the building. The dancer doesn't have lights, music, and costume, and the writer doesn't have a pen. Yet they can be equal in the frame of the exhibition. Friends, it would also be another way of questioning the museum if we say the museum is either oriented towards the past or the present. Then this is closer to presenting that which doesn't yet exist. Of course, this is why Expo Zero is really the counter project to 20 dances of the 20th century. In the later, you can have a fantastic text by Tim Fitzgerald's Erasure, performed by Sarah Dulu. In the Karl Marx School of the German language isn't only for the past but also for the future, because Dimitri Gutov is learning German through this new practice. This project addresses the 20th century from the now, whereas Expo Zero is clearly a project oriented towards the future of Musée de la Danse, oriented towards what is coming and what's the potential of this exhibition is. Friends, Boris, thank you for your eloquence, for your inspiration, and for your explanation.